Hello, hello! Welcome to another installment of Prospero in Bermuda with your host Stephen here in Bermuda on this 12th of August 2024. Well, just yesterday, we reviewed More Than a Skeleton. No, a skeleton in God's... No, More Than a Skeleton. That's the one. Because let's start this. No, we're not going to start this again. More Than a Skeleton. Which is the second in a trio of books by Paul L. Maier. And the book that we reviewed yesterday was about the sensational plot by a radical Jewish sect to falsify a Messiah figure. And our intrepid heroes, John and Shannon, they uncovered the nefarious plot. So, and I gave it a review, gave it 2 out of 5 stars. The schmaltzy romance stuff was a little bit, it was both heavy-handed in every chapter, but also it left the impression that the author was trying to prove to the non-Christian world, or even to other Christians, that it is okay to write about love and affection. But he did it in such a corny way that it grew both tiresome and cringeworthy. I don't like the word cringe. I think it's a bit cringe in and of itself, but sometimes, well, the adjective fits. And this is one of the times that it did. So, I decided, however, as promised, to read the third and final book, the Constantine Codex by Paul L. Maier. And this rounds out the 3 adventures by Jonathan Weber and his wife Shannon. I didn't review the first book, A Skeleton in God's Closet. I read it years ago. I didn't feel like reading it again. The plot of that is a skeleton is found that purports to be of Jesus Christ himself, and due to the falsifiability of the Christian faith, namely that if the bones of Jesus were found and to be somehow authenticated, then that would definitively disprove the resurrection, thereby falsifying Christianity. I didn't feel like reading that one again because obviously the plot was going to climax with them discovering that it was all an elaborate hoax, because he is obviously a Christian writer who's affirming Christianity. Likewise, in the second book, More Than a Body, or More Than a Skeleton, where the Messiah figure was inevitably unveiled as a pretender. Well, imagine my surprise then, where the Constantine Codex breaks with that formula. Because in this book, the plot revolves around the two of them discovering a manuscript that is one of the 50 manuscripts commissioned by Constantine, which is a very real set of manuscripts according to the evidence that we have, but we've never found a copy of one of them. And in this book, the Shannon and John come upon completely by accident a copy of one of the copies of the 50. It's actually in Istanbul, being housed by the Eastern Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox figure very prominently and positively in this book, mainly because this book it's sort of 2 books in one, because there's 2 plots going on. Is this codex that they find authentic, and also what is the relationship between Islam and Christianity. The lead character engages in a big debate that's broadcast live throughout the world with another respected Islamic scholar. The whole purpose in the end is to create better relations between Islam and Christianity, while also very much affirming the distinctiveness of Christianity and the purported errors in Islam. The author goes to great lengths to display his agitation and frustration with Islam, while on the one hand saying that there are moderate Muslims whom we ought to dialogue with. That is a very strong message in the book. Another equally strong message, though, is his irritation with the radicals, because the character of John, who's debating this moderate Islamic scholar, has to navigate a minefield of fundamentalisms and fatwas and so on. I don't want to ruin everything in the book, but the author makes it very clear that there's one rule for Christians, in the sense that they can't say boo to a goose when it comes to Islam, or anybody for that matter, but anybody is allowed to denigrate Christianity. You can put a crucifix in a bowl of urine and call it art, as they have, and deny the existence of Jesus, and so on. Anyway, so that's one plot thread. It's the one major plot thread. The second major plot thread is establishing the authenticity of this codex. Now, what is in this codex? Well, there are two major revelations in it. One is that it contains the lost ending of Mark. As you may know, the original ending of Mark is lost, replaced by snake handling verses that were obviously added much later. And also a book of second acts, which continues the story of Paul and reveals his fate. Now, what one would expect, given the formula of the other two books, would be that he finds that this codex is a fraud. But lo and behold, he breaks with the formula, and this is a work of fiction after all, but it's established that the codex is real. And the book ends with a very interesting ecumenical council, where, and this is really the value of the book. It's not so much in the plotting. Again, there's that heavy-handed, oh, I'm embracing you and spending the night with you together all the time, which just, it makes you think that he's a little bit strange, the author. But it does a fairly good job of hypothesizing what would happen if the canon, an authentic text, was discovered, because there is a very big debate toward the end of the book in the form of an ecumenical council as to whether the canon can be opened to receive these new revelations that have been authenticated. And as you find, it's just the most conservative fundamentalists who say that we can't tamper with the canon of Scripture, because even though they're written by Paul, what was good enough for in the King James Bible is good enough for them. But thankfully, at the end, we find that it's overwhelmingly the Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, the major Protestants all vote to include these new texts in a sort of expanded New Testament, and everybody lives happily ever after. So, breaking with formula, we discover that, wow, we have a fictional situation in which these treasures that have been sought after by New Testament scholars for millennia are discovered, and it would be lovely if that happened in real life, but we sadly don't have any copy or any sign that these things will be discovered anytime soon. As for the book itself, it's slightly longer than the others in terms of pages, but it's actually a shorter book. The font is bigger, the space between lines is greater, and I got through it in less than 24 hours. I had time. I also admittedly skim a little bit. I don't read every jot and tittle. The book is very easy to get through and understand what's going on without reading every single word, simply because it's just one of those books that it's fun to just find out what's happening next, but I don't need to read every time he gazes lovingly into Shannon's eyes and just finds her to be an enchanting creature, and so on. There is a little bit of betrayal. There is a bad guy, a Judas character of a sort. Much of that is quite contrived. There's a miracle here and there of the Codex being rescued from certain destruction. Again, I would give this book, I would give it 2.5 out of 5. I actually enjoyed it more than a skeleton, because you learned a little bit more about textual variations. You learned a little bit more about the relationship between Islam and Christianity. It does quite a sound job of debunking some of the main points of the Quran in terms of its claims about Jesus and the New Testament being corrupted. He also points out the tensions in the Trinity that Muslims like to harp on in debate, to try to say that, you know, three can't be one and so on. So there's I give it points for the didactic quality that he had. I also did in the last book, but this one you learn a little bit more. Plus the scale is smaller. The claim that this is a returned Messiah, you just kind of knew he had to be a fraudster, so there wasn't really any tension. With this one, I actually was reading, wondering, oh, is this thing going to be a fraud, or is it going to turn out to be the real thing? So I found myself being a little more interested in coming to the end and finding what the resolution would be. So I give it 2 out of 5. I've pretty much told you the plot with detailed spoilers, but I don't think any of it really is much of a surprise. I would say go ahead and read it, particularly for the imagined debate that takes place at the Hagia Sophia between the Islamic scholar and the fictional John Weber. Again, you have real people being used who are public figures. You have Dan Wallace, the scholar. There was mention of several media figures who are Anderson Cooper and so on, who are real people, which is kind of fun. It feels kind of timely, even though it was written 15, 20 years ago at this point. So that is my review of the Constantine Codex. I will move on to other pieces of literature, and I am encouraged by reading these books. Even though they are a little schmaltzy, I think they're good for your faith, and I think that it's better to read them than the Dan Brown stuff, because that stuff, although it may be a little more titillating, it's not really good for the soul. This stuff it's a little saccharine, it's a little, nobody's going to win any literary awards for this. But ultimately, it is, it's not doing you any harm. And in some sense, it's doing you some good to read it. So, my friends, enjoy. Keep reaching for the stars. Avoid being Caliban. I haven't quite decided on my signing off phrase yet, but peace.